The house felt bigger at night. Tom had been telling himself that for 3 months now, ever since the papers were signed and she moved out. During the day, he could keep busy. There was work, there were errands to run, there were phone calls to make. But when evening came, the silence crept in like fog. He'd developed a routine of sorts. Come home, heat up something from the freezer, sit on the couch with a glass of wine, and watch old movies until he fell asleep right there. It was easier than going to the empty bedroom upstairs. The couch felt less lonely somehow. This Thursday started like any other. He'd picked up Chinese takeout on the way home, eaten it straight from the container while watching some action movie from the 90s. The wine was helping him relax, making his eyelids heavy. The remote slipped from his hand as sleep took over. He wasn't sure what woke him. Maybe it was the sound of the front door closing, or footsteps on the hardwood floor. His eyes opened slowly, that fuzzy feeling you get when you wake up somewhere you didn't plan to sleep. The TV was still on, casting blue light across the living room. That's when he saw her. She was standing by the stairs, looking lost. Her hair was messy, like she'd been running her hands through it. She wore the old gray sweater he remembered, the one with the hole in the left sleeve that she refused to throw away. Her eyes were red. "I still have the key," she said quietly, holding it up like she needed to explain herself. "I know I should have given it back." Tom sat up slowly, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. 3 months of trying to forget what it felt like to see her every day, and here she was, looking smaller somehow than he remembered. "I couldn't sleep," she continued, wrapping her arms around herself. "The new place is so quiet. Too quiet. I kept thinking I heard you, moving around, but then I'd remember I live alone now." He knew exactly what she meant. How many times had he reached for the coffee pot in the morning, making enough for 2 people out of habit? How many times had he started to call her name when something funny happened on TV? She looked around the living room, her eyes taking in the takeout containers on the coffee table, the empty wine bottle, the blanket he'd been using as his makeshift bed for weeks now. "You're sleeping down here," she said. It wasn't a question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "The bed upstairs feels too big." A small, sad smile crossed her face. "Mine feels too small." They stood there in the blue glow of the television. 2 people who'd shared 8 years of their lives trying to figure out how to talk to each other as strangers. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that comes when 2 people understand each other's pain without needing to explain it. "I was driving around," she said, moving closer to the couch. "Just driving with no place to go. I ended up at that diner we used to like, the one with the terrible coffee but amazing pie. I sat there for 2 hours and I kept expecting you to walk in and slide into the booth across from me." Tom remembered that diner. Sunday mornings after sleeping in late when they were both too lazy to cook breakfast. She always ordered the apple pie, even in the morning, and he always told her it was weird. She'd laugh and steal a bite of his eggs anyway. "I drove past our old coffee shop too," she continued. "The one where we had our first date. Remember how nervous you were? You spilled coffee on your shirt before I even got there." He smiled despite himself. "You made me order 3 different drinks because you couldn't decide what you wanted." "I was nervous too," she said, settling onto the edge of the couch. "I just hid it better." The space between them felt charged with all the history they shared. 8 years of inside jokes, shared dreams, quiet Sunday mornings, and terrible fights that ended in apologies. All of it was still there, hanging in the air like invisible threads connecting them. "I miss having someone to talk to," she said suddenly. "Not just anyone. Someone who gets my jokes, who knows why I hate the sound of people chewing, who remembers that I like my coffee with way too much sugar." "I miss having someone steal my fries," Tom replied. "Even when you ordered your own." She laughed, a real laugh this time, not the polite one she'd been using during their awkward meetings to divide up their belongings. "We were good at some things," she said softly. "We were," he agreed. The silence came back, but it felt different now. Warmer somehow, like sitting by a fire that was slowly dying out, but still giving off enough heat to keep you comfortable. She looked toward the stairs that led to their old bedroom, the room where they'd planned their future, where they'd fought about money and in-laws and whose turn it was to take out the trash. The room where they'd slowly, quietly grown apart, without either of them really noticing until it was too late. "I keep forgetting we're not together anymore," she whispered. "It's the strangest thing. I'll be grocery shopping and I'll reach for your favorite cereal, or I'll see something funny and pick up my phone to text you before I remember." Tom nodded. He'd done the same thing countless times. The muscle memory of loving someone doesn't disappear just because the relationship does. She stood up slowly, like she was making a decision. "Would it be crazy if I asked to stay tonight? Not to get back together or anything like that. Just, I don't want to go back to my empty apartment. Not tonight." Tom looked at her for a long moment. The question hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them was sure they should cross. Stay tonight. Not as husband and wife, not as lovers trying to fix something broken, but as two people who knew each other better than anyone else in the world. "It's not crazy," he said finally. "Nothing about this situation is normal anyway." She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Thank you. I can't handle another night of staring at the ceiling, you know?" He knew exactly what she meant. He'd become an expert at ceiling staring himself. The crack that looked like a tree branch, the water stain from when the upstairs neighbor's washing machine leaked 2 years ago. He could map every imperfection in the darkness. Without saying anything else, they both started moving toward the stairs. It felt natural, like they'd done it 1,000 times before. Which, of course, they had. 8 years of climbing these same stairs together, talking about their days, making plans for tomorrow. The bedroom looked different now, half empty. Her side of the closet was bare, her books gone from the nightstand. The room felt unbalanced, like a picture hanging crooked on the wall. Tom had left everything exactly as it was when she moved out, unable to fill the empty spaces she'd left behind. She sat on the edge of the bed, on what used to be her side. Her hands were shaking slightly as she looked around the room they'd shared for so long. This was where they'd celebrated promotions and worried about bills, where they'd stayed up all night when her mother was in the hospital, where they'd had their last real conversation before everything fell apart. "Remember when we first bought this bed?" she asked, running her hand over the comforter. "We spent 3 hours at that furniture store testing every mattress they had. The salesperson looked like he wanted to throw us out." Tom smiled at the memory. "You insisted we both had to lie down on each one. You said we'd regret it if we didn't test them properly. I was right, wasn't I? We never had trouble sleeping." She paused, then added quietly, "Until the end." The end. They both knew what she meant. Those last few months when they'd lie in, this same bed, backs turned to each other, both pretending to sleep while their minds raced with everything they weren't saying. The silence had grown so thick between them that even sharing a bed felt lonely. "I miss sleeping next to someone," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not the romantic part, just having another person there. Feeling like I'm not the only one awake in the whole world at 3 a.m. Tom sat down beside her, careful to leave space between them. "I know. I keep waking up and reaching for you, forgetting for just a second that you're not there anymore." She turned to look at him, and he could see tears gathering in her eyes. "We weren't terrible people, were we? We just grew apart somehow. Like 2 trees planted too close together, competing for the same sunlight." "We weren't terrible," he agreed. "We just forgot how to be us." The silence settled over them again, but it felt different from the cold silence of their last months together. This was the comfortable quiet they used to share, when words weren't necessary because they understood each other completely. She reached up and touched the collar of her sweater, that old gray one with the hole in the sleeve. "I should change," she said. "This thing is falling apart, but I can't seem to throw it away." "You wore that the first time you stayed over here," Tom remembered. 7 years ago. I made you breakfast and you complained that my coffee was too weak." "It was too weak," she laughed, wiping at her eyes. "And you burned the toast. But you looked so proud of yourself for cooking for me." "I was trying to impress you." "You did. Not with the cooking, but with how hard you were trying. She stood up and walked to the dresser where she used to keep clothes for nights when she stayed over, back when they were dating. To her surprise, Tom had kept some of her old things there. A t-shirt she'd forgotten, some comfortable pajama, pants, little reminders of when their relationship was new and full of possibility. "You kept these," she said, holding up the soft cotton shirt. "I kept a lot of things," Tom admitted. "I couldn't bring myself to pack them all up. It felt too final." She nodded, understanding completely. Change was hard enough without having to erase every trace of what used to be. She took the clothes and headed toward the bathroom they used to share, where his toothbrush still sat next to the spot where hers used to be. When she came back, wearing the old familiar clothes, Tom felt a strange mix of comfort and sadness. She looked like herself again, like the woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But she also looked tired, older somehow, carrying the weight of everything they'd been through. "The bathroom still smells like your soap," she said, settling back onto the bed. "I couldn't bring myself to change anything," he replied. "This whole house is like a museum of us." She pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself small on the big bed. "Maybe that's not healthy." "Probably not. But I wasn't ready to let go of everything at once." They sat there together, two people who had loved each other deeply, who had built a life together and watched it slowly fall apart despite their best efforts. The room was full of ghosts of their younger selves, echoes of laughter and whispered conversations and quiet Sunday mornings. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Anything. Do you think we could have saved it? If we'd tried harder, talked more, gone to counseling sooner?" Tom was quiet for a long time, considering the question that had kept him awake so many nights. "Maybe," he said eventually. "Or maybe we would have just delayed the inevitable. Sometimes I think we changed into different people, and those people just weren't compatible anymore." She nodded slowly. "I think about that too. Whether we grew apart or grew into who we were always meant to be separately." "Both can be true," Tom said. "We can be grateful for what we had and still accept that it's over." She looked at him with something like relief in her eyes. "I've been feeling so guilty about not fighting harder for us." "Me too. But maybe accepting that something beautiful can end doesn't make it less beautiful. Maybe it just makes it complete." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with truth. She pulled the old t-shirt closer around herself, as if trying to hold on to the comfort it brought. The fabric was soft from years of washing, worn thin in places, but it still smelled, faintly like the lavender detergent she'd always used. "I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd show up at her ex-husband's house in the middle of the night," she said, shaking her head. "My mother would be horrified." Tom almost smiled at that. Her mother had never quite approved of him, always thought her daughter could do better. Maybe she was right. Maybe they both could have done better, been better for each other. "My dad keeps asking me if I'm dating anyone yet," Tom said. "Like 3 months is enough time to just move on from 8 years. "People don't understand," she agreed. "They think divorce means you stop caring about each other overnight, like there's a switch you can flip." She shifted on the bed, and for a moment she looked so lost that Tom's heart ached for her. Not in the way it used to when they were together, but in the way you ache for anyone who's hurting, especially someone you've cared about deeply. "I've been having these dreams," she said quietly, "where we're still married, still living here together. Everything is normal and fine. And then I wake up and remember and it feels like losing you all over again." "I have those dreams too," Tom admitted. "The worst part is how real they feel. Like for just a few minutes I get to live in a world where we figured it out." She wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of the old t-shirt. "I miss having someone who knew all my stories, you know what I mean? Like I could start a sentence with, 'Remember when,' and you'd immediately know what I was talking about." Tom nodded. That was one of the things he missed most. The shorthand that came with years of shared experience. The way she could look at him across a crowded room and he'd know exactly what she was thinking. The way they could have entire conversations with just glances. "I went to dinner with my sister last week," she continued, "and I was telling her about something that happened at work. but I had to explain all this background context that you would have already known. It took forever to get to the actual story. It's lonely, isn't it? Tom said. Starting over with someone new means they don't know any of your history. They don't know why certain songs make you cry or why you're afraid of moths. You remember that I'm afraid of moths? Of course I remember. You made me kill that huge one in the kitchen last summer. You stood on a chair and pointed at it like you were directing a military operation. She laughed despite her tears. It was enormous, and it was flying right at my face. It was barely an inch long. Size doesn't matter with moths. They're all equally terrifying. For a moment, they were just themselves again, not two people who'd failed at marriage, not exes trying to figure out how to coexist. Just Tom and his wife who was afraid of moths and made terrible coffee and could make him laugh even when he was having the worst day. But then the moment passed, and reality settled back over them like a heavy blanket. This is so hard, she whispered, being here with you, remembering what it felt like when things were good between us. It makes me want to pretend we could go back. But we can't, Tom said gently. No, we can't. She took a shaky breath. We tried so hard at the end. Remember, those last few months? We were both walking on eggshells, trying so hard to be perfect for each other that we forgot how to just be real. Tom remembered. The forced conversations, the careful politeness, the way they'd both started editing themselves, afraid that one wrong word would be the final straw. It had been exhausting, loving someone while simultaneously trying not to upset them. I keep thinking about that last fight we had, she said. The one about the dishes. It wasn't really about the dishes, Tom said. No, it wasn't. It was about feeling like roommates instead of partners. About going through the motions of being married without actually connecting anymore. They'd been so polite to each other in those final weeks. Please and thank you and excuse me like they were strangers sharing a hotel room. The intimacy had drained out of their relationship so gradually that they'd hardly noticed until it was completely gone. I felt invisible, she said quietly. Like you could see me, but you couldn't really see me anymore. Do you know what I mean? Tom knew exactly what she meant. Somewhere along the way, they'd stopped being curious about each other. They'd assumed they knew everything there was to know, so they'd stopped asking questions, stopped really listening to the answers. I felt invisible, too, he said. Like I was performing the role of your husband instead of actually being your husband. She nodded, fresh tears spilling over. When did we stop being real with each other? I don't know. It happened so slowly. Like watching your hair grow or getting older. You don't notice it day by day, but then one day you look in the mirror and realize everything's different. She turned to face him fully, tucking one leg under herself. Can I tell you something I never said before? Of course. I was scared to tell you when I was unhappy because I didn't want to hurt your feelings. So I just kept it inside and hoped it would get better on its own. Tom felt a familiar pang of regret. I did the same thing. I thought I was protecting you, but I was really just protecting myself from having difficult conversations. We were both trying so hard to be good partners that we forgot how to be honest partners. She reached out tentatively and touched his hand. Her fingers were cold, and Tom had the impulse to warm them up the way he used to, rubbing them between his palms until she complained that he was being too rough. I want you to know, she said, that even though our marriage didn't work, you weren't a bad husband. You tried. We both tried. Tom felt his throat tighten. You weren't a bad wife either. We just weren't good for each other anymore. Do you think we'll be okay? She asked. Eventually, I mean. Do you think we'll both figure out how to be happy without each other? Tom looked at her face, really looked at it. The face he'd kissed goodbye thousands of mornings. The face he'd watched, laugh at terrible movies and cry during commercials about dogs. The face he'd loved for 8 years and would probably always love in some way. Yeah, he said. I think we'll be okay. Different than we planned, but okay. She smiled through her tears, and for the first time in months, it looked genuine. Not the brave smile she'd been wearing during their divorce proceedings. Not the polite smile she used when people asked how she was doing. But her real smile. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For letting me stay tonight. For not making this weird or complicated. For helping me remember that even though our marriage ended, it wasn't all bad. We had good years. We did have good years, Tom agreed. And maybe that's enough. Maybe it's okay that some things are beautiful and temporary. She nodded and settled, back against the pillows, suddenly looking exhausted. The emotional weight of the evening had caught up with her, and Tom could see that she was finally relaxed enough to actually sleep. Will you stay? She asked quietly. On your side of the bed, I mean. I just don't want to be alone tonight. Tom nodded and moved to his old side of the bed, the side closest to the door because she'd always said it made her feel safer, knowing he was between her and any potential intruders. They lay down together, not touching but close enough to hear each other breathing. Good night, she whispered. Good night, Tom replied, and for the first time in months they both fell asleep easily, comforted by the presence of someone who knew them completely, even if they couldn't be together anymore. The morning light came slowly, like someone turning up a dimmer switch degree by degree. Tom woke first, the way he always had during their marriage. For a moment, in that fuzzy space between sleep and consciousness, everything felt normal. The familiar weight beside him, the sound of someone else breathing softly, the warmth of another person under the covers. Then reality crashed back in like cold water. He lay perfectly still, afraid to move and wake her up, afraid to break whatever fragile peace they'd found in sleep. Her hair was spread across the pillow, catching the early sunlight that filtered through the curtains they'd picked out together 3 years ago. She looked younger in sleep, peaceful in a way she hadn't looked in months before their divorce. His back was to her, but he could feel her presence behind him. The slight dip in the mattress where her body rested, the rhythm of her breathing that he'd fallen asleep to thousands of times. It was so familiar it made his chest ache. He wondered what time it was. The house was quiet except for the usual morning sounds. The coffee maker they'd programmed to start at 7 was gurgling in the kitchen downstairs. The neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard next door. Normal sounds of a normal morning, except nothing about this was normal. What were they supposed to do now? How do you wake up next to someone you used to be married to and pretend it doesn't mean anything? How do you share coffee and make small talk when you've just spent the night remembering everything you used to be to each other? Behind him, she stirred. He heard the small sound she always made when she was waking up, a tiny sigh that meant consciousness was returning. He felt her body shift as she stretched, then go completely still as she remembered where she was and what had happened. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. They lay there like two people who'd stumbled into a minefield, afraid that any sudden movement might cause an explosion. Finally, she broke the silence. I can smell the coffee, she said softly. 7 a.m. every morning, Tom replied. Some habits are hard to break. You still set it to make coffee for 2 people, don't you? Tom nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Yeah, I keep meaning to adjust it, but it feels too sad to program it for just 1 cup. Exactly. She shifted again, and Tom could tell she was sitting up. He rolled over to face her, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Her hair was messy, sticking up in all directions. She had pillow creases on her cheek. She looked exactly like she had on 1,000 other mornings except for the sadness in her eyes. This is awkward, she said with a small laugh that wasn't quite genuine. Yeah, it is, Tom agreed. But it's okay to be awkward. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. I slept better last night than I have in months. Me too. That makes this harder, doesn't it? Knowing that we're both lonely enough to sleep better next to someone we can't actually be with anymore. Tom sat up too, running his hands through his hair. Maybe. Or maybe it just proves that we cared about each other for real, that it wasn't all bad at the end. She looked around the bedroom, taking in all the familiar details. The reading lamp on his side that was always too bright for her, the stack of books on her nightstand that she'd been meaning to take to her new place, The framed photo of them from their honeymoon that he still hadn't put away. You kept our picture, she noticed. I kept a lot of our pictures. I didn't know what else to do with them. They're part of my history now, whether we're together or not. She nodded thoughtfully. I put most of mine in a box. I couldn't look at them, but I couldn't throw them away either. What are we doing? Tom asked suddenly. I mean, what is this? Last night, this morning, us being here together like this? She was quiet for a long moment, considering his question. I think we're saying goodbye, she said finally. Really saying goodbye, not just the legal kind we did at the lawyer's office. Is that what this was? A goodbye? Maybe. Or maybe we're just two people who loved each other trying to figure out how to not love each other anymore. Tom felt something twist in his chest at those words. Do you think that's possible? To just stop loving someone? I don't know, she admitted. I think maybe the love changes. Like, I'll probably always love the person you were to me, the life we built together, even if I can't be in love with you anymore. That made sense to Tom. He'd been struggling to understand his own feelings, the way he could miss her terribly, while also feeling relieved that they weren't together anymore, the way he could remember their good times fondly while also knowing that trying to recreate them would be a mistake. I should probably get dressed, she said, looking down at the old t-shirt she was wearing. This was your favorite shirt on me, wasn't it? One of them, Tom said. You looked good in everything, though. She smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. Past tense. I didn't mean it that way. I know, but it's true, isn't it? We're past tense now. We were married. We used to live together. We were happy once upon a time. She got up and started gathering her clothes from the night before, folding them carefully like she was trying to buy time before facing the day ahead. What happens now? Tom asked. Do we pretend this didn't happen? Do we talk about it? Do we never see each other again? She paused in her folding. I don't think we can pretend it didn't happen. And I don't think we should never see each other again. We were a big part of each other's lives. Maybe we can figure out how to be, I don't know, former partners who wish each other well. Friends seems like the wrong word. Yeah, friends doesn't fit, but not enemies either. Something in between. Tom watched her get dressed, the familiar routine of someone he'd shared mornings with for years. She moved with the same efficiency. She always had. But there was a carefulness to it now, an awareness that this was probably the last time they'd share a morning like this. I'm going to make coffee, he said, needing something normal to do with his hands. Do you want some? Please. With too much sugar, the way you always complained about. I never complained about your sugar. I complained that you'd use up all of it and forget to put it on the grocery list. Oh, right. She laughed. I was terrible at grocery lists. You were terrible at a lot of domestic things. But you were good at the important stuff. She paused in putting on her shoes and looked at him. What important stuff? Making me laugh when I was stressed. Remembering my mom's birthday when I forgot. Talking me into taking vacations I didn't think we could afford. That turned out to be exactly what we needed. Her eyes filled with tears again. Don't, she said. Don't make this harder by being nice. I'm not trying to make it harder. I just want you to know that even though we couldn't make it work, you weren't the problem. We were the problem, together. And that's nobody's fault. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. You were good at important stuff too, like fixing everything that broke in this house and holding me when I couldn't sleep because I was worried about my dad's health, and making me feel safe. They stood there looking at each other, two people, who had genuinely cared for each other, trying to figure out how to let that caring exist without it being a reason to stay together. I should go, she said finally. Yeah, Tom agreed. But coffee first. One last cup of terrible coffee together. It wasn't terrible coffee. It was weak coffee. Terrible weak coffee, Tom corrected, and she laughed. Okay, one last cup of terrible, weak coffee. But then I really do have to go. They both knew she was right. Whatever closure this night had given them would be ruined if they tried to stretch it into something it wasn't. Some things were meant to be brief and perfect, like a song that ends exactly when it should. The coffee was perfect that morning, not because Tom had suddenly learned how to make it stronger, but because they both knew it was the last time they'd share this particular ritual. They sat at the kitchen table where they'd eaten breakfast, together for years, where they'd planned vacations and argued about money and read the newspaper out loud to each other on lazy Sunday mornings. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug, inhaling the familiar smell. "I'm going to miss this kitchen," she said. "You can have it," Tom offered. "In the divorce settlement, I mean. I know you always loved cooking in here more than I did." She shook her head. "No, this is your house now. Besides, I need to learn how to cook in a new kitchen. It'll be good for me." They drank their coffee in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the world was waking up. Cars drove by on their way to work. The mailman walked his usual route. Life was continuing normally while they sat in this bubble of endings and beginnings. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Anything. Do you think we'll talk again? I mean, really talk. Not just the polite stuff when we run into each other. At the grocery store." Tom considered this carefully. "Honestly, I don't know. Maybe someday when enough time has passed that it doesn't hurt to remember what we used to be. Maybe we'll be able to be friends then." "I'd like that," she said. "You were one of my best friends before you were my husband. I miss that friendship almost as much as I miss the marriage. We can't be friends right now, though. No, we can't. Too much history, too much hurt, too much love that doesn't have anywhere to go anymore." She finished her coffee and set the mug down with finality. "I really should go now." Tom nodded, though part of him wanted to ask her to stay longer, to have one more conversation, to remember one more shared memory, to delay the moment when she walked out that door and they both had to figure out how to build separate lives. But he knew that would be selfish. They'd given each other what they needed last night: comfort, closure, and the reminder that their love had been real even if it wasn't meant to last forever. She stood up and gathered her things, moving with the same careful efficiency she'd had upstairs. Tom walked her to the front door, the same door she'd entered through just 12 hours ago, looking lost and desperate for connection. She looked different now. Still sad, but not broken. Like someone who'd found what she was looking for, even if what she'd found was the strength to let go. "Thank you," she said, her hand on the doorknob. "For last night, for this morning, for letting me say goodbye properly." "Thank you too," Tom replied, "for reminding me that we had something beautiful, even if we couldn't make it last." She reached up and hugged him then, a real hug, not the awkward half-embraces they'd exchanged during the divorce proceedings. He hugged her back, memorizing the feel of her in his arms one last time. "Take care of yourself," she whispered against his shoulder. "You too." She pulled away and looked at him one more time, as if she was trying to memorize his face. Then she opened the door and walked out into the bright morning sunshine. Tom stood in the doorway and watched her get into her car. She didn't look back, and he was grateful for that. Some goodbyes were better without lingering glances and second thoughts after. Her car disappeared around the corner. Tom closed the door and leaned against it. The house felt different now, still empty but not as hollow as it had been. Like the loneliness had shifted from desperate to manageable. He walked back to the kitchen and looked at their 2 coffee mugs sitting on the table. For a moment he considered washing them immediately, erasing the evidence of their shared morning. Instead, he left them there and went upstairs to shower and get ready for work. The weeks that followed were strange. Tom found himself thinking about that night often, but not with regret. It had been exactly what they both needed. A chance to remember who they'd been to each other without the weight of trying to fix what was broken. He started making small changes to the house. Not dramatic renovations, just little shifts that made it feel more like his space and less like a museum of their marriage. He moved furniture around, bought new pillows for the couch, finally adjusted the coffee maker to brew for 1 person instead of 2. 3 weeks later, he saw her at the farmer's market downtown. She was buying flowers from the same vendor they used to visit together, laughing at something the elderly woman was saying. She looked good, different somehow, lighter. Their eyes met across the crowded market, and she smiled. Not the sad, complicated smile from that morning in his kitchen, but a genuine, warm smile. He smiled back and raised his hand in a small wave. She waved back, then turned back to her flowers. They didn't approach each other, didn't try to make conversation. But the smile they'd shared felt like progress, like maybe someday, when enough time had passed, they really could be friends again. Tom continued his shopping, buying vegetables and bread from vendors they used to visit together. But instead of feeling sad about the memories, he felt grateful for them. Those had been good years, and the fact that they'd ended didn't make them any less valuable. A month later, he signed up for a cooking class, something he'd never done while they were married because she'd been the cook in their relationship. It felt good to learn something new, to discover parts of himself that had been dormant during their years together. He started sleeping in the bedroom again instead of on the couch. He bought new sheets, different from the ones they'd shared, and slowly the room began to feel like his space instead of their space. One evening, while making dinner for himself in the quiet kitchen, Tom realized he was okay. Not happy exactly. Not yet, but okay. The sharp edge of grief that had followed him for months was starting to dull into something more manageable, a gentle sadness that he could carry without it weighing him down. He thought about her sometimes, wondered if she was okay too, if she was learning to be happy in her new apartment with its small kitchen and unfamiliar sounds. He hoped she was. He hoped they were both figuring out how to build lives that felt full and meaningful even without each other. 6 months after that night, Tom ran into her sister at the grocery store. They chatted briefly, carefully, both aware that they were navigating complicated territory. "She's doing well," her sister said finally, as if she knew Tom was wondering but was too polite to ask. "She started taking art classes. Remember how she always wanted to try painting?" Tom smiled at that. She'd mentioned wanting to learn to paint many times during their marriage, but they'd always been too busy, too focused on practical things, like mortgages and career advancement. "That's great," he said, and meant it. She always had a good eye for color. She does. Her apartment is full of her paintings now. They're actually pretty good. After they parted ways, Tom found himself genuinely happy for her. She was discovering new parts of herself, building a life that belonged entirely to her. It was exactly what she deserved. That night, as he fell asleep in his own bed in his own house, Tom felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. Not the desperate, clinging kind of peace that comes from avoiding painful truths, but the deep, settled kind that comes from accepting reality and finding a way to thrive within it. Their marriage was over, but their story wasn't a failure. It was simply complete. They'd loved each other well for as long as they could, and when they couldn't anymore, they'd had the courage to let each other go. There was beauty in that, even if it wasn't the kind of beauty they'd planned on, and someday, maybe years from now, they might be able to sit down together and remember their marriage with more joy than sadness. They might be able to celebrate what they'd built together without mourning what they'd lost. But for now, it was enough that they were both okay. It was enough that they'd loved each other truly and let each other go gently. It was enough that they were both learning how to be happy again, separately but with gratitude for the years they'd shared. Some love stories end with forever, others end with grace. Both kinds of endings have their own kind of beauty.